Welcome to session 352 of the Bible in a Year commentary. If you started the series on the 1st of January, then today should be the 18th of December. Today we'll be looking at Revelation 12 to 13 and Psalm 42. But so far in Revelation, we've read through the messages to the 7 churches, the courtroom scene, and started the 3 sets of 7 divine judgments. Revelation, attributed to John, reveals the spiritual battles behind earthly struggles, asking, will you choose light or darkness? Addressed to 7 churches, it represents Jesus as a ruler of kings, cleansing believers through his blood, and uniting Daniel 7's imagery of God and the Son of Man. John described 7 lampstands symbolizing churches, and then 7 stars symbolizing their angels, with Jesus commissioning him to deliver messages to each church. Ephesus needed renewal, Smyrna was encouraged to stay faithful, Pergamum and Thyatira faced corruption, Sardis needed revival, Philadelphia was promised protection, and Laodicea was urged to recognize their spiritual poverty. These messages reminded believers of the spiritual battle that was happening and called for their repentance. After addressing the churches, John saw heaven's throne with 24 elders symbolizing humanity's restored role as co-rulers with God. Living creatures worship God alongside the elders. John noticed a scroll of judgment sealed 7 times and wept when none could open it. An elder declared the Lion of Judah worthy, but John saw a slaughtered lamb with 7 horns symbolizing authority. And the lamb's blood redeemed people from all nations, making them a kingdom of priests. Worship of the Lamb spread to angels and all creation. The Lamb then opened the seals, initiating the first of the 3 cycles of 7 judgments. The first 4 seals brought the horsemen, war, conflict, famine, and death. The 5th revealed martyred believers awaiting God's plan, and the 6th unleashed apocalyptic upheaval, signaling the final judgment. Between the 6th and 7th seals, John sees believers marked with God's seal and a vast multinational crowd in white robes, purified by the Lamb's blood. The 7th seal brought silence, interpreted as awe, worship, or maybe shock. An angel offered incense, representing the believer's prayers, before casting altar fire to the earth, signalling the day of the Lord. The 7 trumpets echoed elements of Egypt's plagues. They represented divine warnings throughout history, be they calamities, upheavals, war, or the consequences of idolatry. Between the 6th and 7th trumpets, an angel announced that the 7th would reveal God's mystery and final judgment. John then measured the temple, which symbolized the believers as God's true temple. We got reference to 3.5 years, which is half a 7. As 7 signifies completeness, 3.5 was shorthand for saying a period of time that would be cut short. 2 witnesses represented the church, prophesying with power, but they were seemingly defeated by a beast. Like Jesus, the church would rise again, leading to the 7th trumpet declaring Jesus' eternal reign and God's presence fully revealed. But let's jump into today's reading, Revelation 12 to 13. We take a break from the set of 7 judgments to look at some signs and symbols. First, a sign appears in heaven of a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and crying out in birth pangs in the agony of giving birth. It's Revelation 12 verses 1 to 2. As we'll see in a bit, this woman gives birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. It's Revelation 12 verse 5. So this son is clearly meant to be Jesus. This has then caused some debate over who the woman is to represent. And there are some who argue that as this woman is to give birth to Jesus, then it must be talking about Mary. But that is perhaps a too simplified interpretation. Others then assume that it is the church. And while we see later that the other children of the woman are later described as those who keep the commandments of God, it's Revelation 12 verse 17, the church did not birth Jesus, Jesus birthed the church. So the next logical step is to say that the woman is Israel. In the Old Testament, we often see Israel depicted as a woman in labour. Have a look at Isaiah 26 verses 17 to 18 and Micah 4 verse 9 to 10. And then here in Revelation, this woman has a crown of 12 stars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. We can then perhaps go one further, merging the church in Israel to suggest that this woman represents the people of God generally. That started off with the people of Israel, but was expanded beyond them to include all believers. But then we get a second sign in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on its head. It's Revelation 12 verse 3. Throughout the Old Testament, we saw many references to the Leviathan, who was a sea dragon that embodied chaos. See Psalm 74 verses 13 to 14 and Isaiah 27 verse 1. We also saw many times where kingdoms and empires were described as like dragons. See Ezekiel 29 verse 3 or Jeremiah 51 verse 34. But here in Revelation, that dragon is named. He is described as that ancient serpent who is called Devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. That's Revelation 12 verse 8. This is the dragon that is behind the smaller dragons of individual kingdoms and empires that have ruled and continue to rule. The dragon cast 1/3 of the stars down from heaven, and some have assumed that this means that 1/3 of all angels joined Satan. Instead, it's drawing on Daniel 8 verses 9 to 10, where a beast launches an attack on heaven, trampling the stars, which is common imagery for spiritual beings underfoot. The dragon is waging war against heaven. It then positions itself to eat the child of the woman, but this child, who was born to rule all nations, is swept up to sit by God on his throne. Meanwhile, the woman is taken to the wilderness for 1,260 days, 3.5 years, a period that will be cut short. This leads to an outright war in heaven between the angel Michael and the forces of God, and then the dragon and his angels. The dragon and his army are defeated and cast out of heaven to earth, where he then seeks to deceive those on earth. In this, we have the forces of evil rebelling against God's plan and, while they are defeated, still able to cause trouble. But then the heavens declared the salvation of Jesus. The accuser has been defeated and conquered by heaven's comrades, believers who conquer by the blood of the Lamb. Some believers have been willing to give their own life for the testimony of Jesus. So let the heavens rejoice and let the earth weep, for the destruction and wrath will come soon. But back to the dragon. It is now on earth and starts to persecute God's people. They were protected for a time and nourished, and then the dragon tried to drown them, but creation itself swallowed up the flood and saved them. So the dragon turns to wage war on the church instead. This leads to a beast rising out of the sea. This is a reference to Daniel 7 that saw 4 beasts rising out of the sea. There they represented different empires that would rise up and oppress the world. Here, the beast rises up and serves the dragon. It is allowed to wield authority and blaspheme for a period that will be cut short. The beast wars against believers and defeats them, ruling over nations, and the nations in turn worship it. Then another beast rises up, performing great miracles and pointing people to the first beast. It creates the image of the beast that causes all to worship the beast. Enslaving all, it marks everyone with the name of the beast on their hand and on their forehead. No one can trade or sell without the mark of the beast, and the number of the beast is 666. This has caused a lot of conspiracies and bizarre theories over the years, so let's break down this complex imagery. First of all, the mark on the hands and on the head are meant to be an inversion of those who bear God's name. In the Old Testament, we see the people of God metaphorically marked on the hand and on the head to show that they are loyal to God. Have a look at Exodus 13 verse 9 to 16, Deuteronomy 6 verses 8, and Deuteronomy 11 verse 18. In the same way here, there will be people who are marked showing their loyalty to the beast. Just as we don't see God's mark as a literal mark in the Old Testament, we can assume that the mark here isn't a literal mark. We then have the fact that John is clearly making references to empires around at the time, the Roman Empire. For example, there's the fact that 666 can be got when you turn the letters of Nero, depending on how you spell it, into numbers and then add them up to 666 or 616, as we'll see in Revelation 13 verse 18. There are also lots of other images of the beast that you can link back to Rome for those that want to take the time to study those. For example, the fact that people can't trade or sell without the mark of the beast may be a reference to the fact that the coins had the emperor's face on them. You literally could not trade without the mark of the beast, the emperor's. But the point is this: like Daniel 7, the beasts represent empires and powers that rule and dominate. John is specifically colouring these beasts with imagery of the empires and powers that are ruling at the time. But these beasts are meant to represent all empires and powers. And what we see in this passage is that these empires are not the ultimate enemy. They serve a greater enemy, the dragon. And while it has been hinted throughout this letter, this passage drives home more explicitly that there is a spiritual battle against the forces of God and the forces of evil. The powers and empires that believers encounter throughout history are merely servants of those forces of evil, and there will be times where these servants will crush and destroy believers. But the battle is not finished yet. That is Revelation 12 to 13. Now let's look at Psalm 42. As we move into the second of the 5 books of the Psalms, that's Psalm 42 to 72, we start to see new authors introduced. This psalm is attributed to the sons of Korah. Korah was likely a Levite musician. His sons here are either his direct sons or a group descended from him. This psalm falls into the category of lament psalms and is structured in 2 halves, with each half ending with the same refrain. Here is a summary of the structure, but I would recommend checking out the written version of this commentary in the description to see the structure properly for yourself. We start with verses 1 to 4, I desire God. Verse 5, why are you downcast, my soul? Verses 6 to 10, God feels close yet far. And then verse 11, why are you downcast, my soul? The psalm opens with a desperate need of the soul. The psalmist needs God just like a deer needs water. There is some Hebrew wordplay happening here. The Hebrew word for soul is nephesh. Generally speaking, it means one's whole being, but literally it means throat. If this seems strange to you, think about the English saying, I love you with all of my heart. When someone says this, they're not actually speaking about the organ that pumps blood around their body. They mean all that they are. In the same way, while the word nephesh literally means throat, it also means a person's entire being. So the wordplay here is that the psalmist is saying their throat, their whole being, is thirsty for God. The psalmist is grieved by their need for God. It leads them to tears. And in search of hope, they remind themselves of good times in the past, when they would lead others in worship of God. It's at this point that the psalmist turns to themselves. They encourage themselves to continue to have hope. They will once again praise God, for He is their salvation. Moving into the second section, the psalmist recognizes that despite this, they still feel downcast. So they continue to remind themselves of God's faithfulness, of how God used to feel like a wave constantly washing over them, how God's steadfast love used to be a constant reminder. And then the psalmist comes back to their current emotions, allowing themselves to feel them for a moment. Currently, it feels like God has forgotten them. They feel wounded as though they are wasting away without God. Then once more the psalmist speaks to themselves, encouraging themselves to take hope. In this psalm, we see the value in allowing ourselves to feel the range of emotions while not allowing ourselves to be swept up by them. Too often we fall into the trap of not wanting to feel our negative emotions because we don't want to feel them, or we feel like we shouldn't feel them, or we allow ourselves to get completely caught up by them. Here, the psalmist allows themselves to feel their grief, but also balances it out with the memories of God's faithfulness and ultimately commits themselves continuing to hope in God. Thanks for joining us today. Take a moment to reflect on what you've read and share your thoughts or questions below. If you're watching in the future, then you can click here for the next session, or you can find the full playlist just down here. To receive these daily commentaries in your email inbox, subscribe via the link in the description below. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.